it's spooky season. Come on in, light it up, pop a top, and let's talk about some good old-fashioned horror. What have I been watching this Halloween season? Stick around to find out. Yeah! Happy Halloween, guys. My name's Scott. Thanks for joining me in the Movie Den for my Halloween special, where I'll be talking to you about what I've been watching this horror season. Now, growing up, especially in the 80s, horror is my favorite genre. And I believe without a certainty that the 80s did give us some of the best horror films ever made. We had the likes of horror icons, Jason, Freddy, Michael Myers, Chucky, Pinhead. We had great movies like An American Werewolf in London, John Carpenter's The Thing, The Shining, Child's Play, Evil Dead, Hellraiser. They all came from that great decade. But over the years, my taste in the genre and my interest in the genre changed exponentially because for a long period of time it was just the same wash, rinse, repeat formulas. And I was getting bored with it. Now over the years, horror has been seen to be making a comeback in new, interesting, and inventive ways, with A24 producing some great indie horror films like Hereditary, Midsummer, Infinity Pool. You know, we even have had a big resurgence in horror icons coming back for legacy sequels like the recent Halloween films, the Texas Chainsaw film over on Netflix. We had the recent Exorcist Believer where they brought back the mom for some dumb reason. But anyways, for this special, I've been hard at work on watching 31 films that I've either not seen yet or have not seen in a very long time. And yes, a great majority of these films are from the 80s, but I've also sprinkled in a smidge of the newer stuff. These won't be in-depth reviews or philosophical in any way. I'm just going to give my thoughts on them without any spoilers. And these will just be random, not ranked, because I just really didn't have time to sit down and rank these. So, with that said, here we go. Okay, the first two out of the gate are Psycho 2 and Psycho 3. Now, I had seen these back in the day when they were first released on VHS, but I haven't seen them since. I thought they were pretty good movies back in the day, average horror slasher films. But before seeing these sequels, I had never seen the original Psycho except for clips on TV back in the day. It wasn't until years later that I was able to view it in its entirety, and I fell in love with the film. Now, after revisiting Psycho 2, I have a much more appreciation for the character of Norman Bates. This has absolutely got to be one of the best horror sequels ever made, in my opinion. Psycho 2 did in 1983 with legacy sequels that legacy sequels are trying to do today. So take a lesson from Psycho 2, guys. They did it right. It once again stars Anthony Perkins reprising his role of Norman Bates, who after 22 years is declared sane and released back into society, where he returns home to his house and the Bates Motel. He gets a job at a local diner where he meets a waitress played by Meg Tilly. That would be Jennifer Tilly's sister. She gets in a pinch and has nowhere to go, so Norman Bates invites her to stay at his motel. She reluctantly agrees, and then the story takes off from there. I believe the script is well written by Fright Night director Tom Holland. The atmosphere is creepy and chilling. The characters are interested, including Robert Loggia, who plays Norman's doctor. There are great things here, including a great twist ending that capped it off pretty nicely. Now, Psycho 3 was a pretty decent sequel as well. Not as good as 2, but it still had a good story that kept it interesting. It had some good characters, but not nearly as interesting as Psycho 2. And at this point, and as seen towards the end of Psycho 2, Norman has become more of the protagonist in these films. Yeah, he might be a little crazy, but is he really? Moving on, we have American Gothic. I remember seeing the cover art, which was a take on the 1930 painting by Grant Wood. And I distinctly remember seeing the tagline on the box, "The family that stays together, slays together." I was hooked. And let me tell you, this was one hard film to get through. Not as tough as some of the others on this list, but it was definitely a rough one. It follows a group of travelers who become stranded on an island where they find themselves in the clutches of a demented family of murderers. It stars Rod Steiger and Lily Munster, Yvonne DiCarlo, who were clearly having a good time in their entertaining roles. But, it really doesn't save this film. Most of the cast are dumb and deserve to die, in my opinion, and the grown-up kids were fucking unintentionally campy and just annoying as hell. Granted, there were some alright kills and ways they take out these teens. But, in the end, it's basic shit for a campy 80s horror flick. Check it out if you want to. Alright. Next up on the list, we have a serial killer copycat in Jack the Ripper in 1988's Jack's Back. This is Roadhouse director Roddy Harrington's directorial debut. James Spader, amazing, plays dual roles as brothers. One is murdered but deemed a suicide. The other brother arrives to let them know that it was not a suicide, but in fact a murder, because he's been seeing visions of the killer. He becomes a suspect, and of course, the mystery begins. I had seen this for the first time back in the VHS days, and I remember liking it. But as with a lot of the older films I haven't seen in ages, I didn't remember much of what went on in that film. I'm glad that I decided to include it because the acting is solid, with James Spader being the standout. There's enough going on in here to keep you interested. The script is pretty intriguing, and I do admit it does take a little time, 20 minutes or so, to really pick up. If you can just get past all the setup, you'll be in for a real treat. I don't want to say much more without giving spoilers, because we find out who... Anyways, no spoilers, moving on. Next up, I watched 1999's The Bats, about a swarm of genetically mutated bats who terrorize a local Texas town. Zoologist Dina Meyer teams up with local sheriff Lou Diamond Phillips to exterminate the creatures before they can take any more lives. Now, this was not really a rewatch, but I just never finished it. I'd seen bits and pieces, and I remembered it being okay then anyways, for what I had seen. On this rewatch, it was just meh for me. Not a shitty movie by any means. It was just middle of the field for me. The bat designs were okay. Daylight, they looked a little too fake for me. But still kind of cool in a way. The cast was what to expect in an Echo killer bat movie. Lou Diamond Phillips is the standout, though. And there's some decent stuff in there to make it watchable. But nothing super memorable. A good time killer for sure. Especially if you're lovers of creature features. Talk to Me was a first time. Home invasion horror is probably my least favorite in the genre. Not many I liked. I did like The Strangers. I did like Funny Games and You're Next. But as with most horror, they're usually hit and miss, and they're more misses than hits for me. But another film I did check out in this genre was Hulu's No One Will Save You, and I loved it. It was a hit for me. I thought it took the home invasion genre to a whole new level. And I really thought this was a really entertaining story with a tight script and direction. We had aliens instead of random people fucking with the occupants of the house. And in this case, in this story, we focus on a single character named Bryn, and she's played by Caitlin Dever, who's a seamstress still living in her childhood home and is mourning the loss of her mother and her best friend. She is a recluse who is shunned by the townsfolk and really don't like going to town for that reason. So I'm sure she just goes to get everything she needs for a good amount of time so as not to have to endure much of that bullshit. And I'm right there with her and would probably do the same. I felt that these people were a bit assholish to her, but I got why they were that way, but it just didn't seem fair to me. One night she is visited by some home invaders who turn out to be aliens. It's a very tense script with a great score, and Caitlin Dever does a fantastic job in her role, where she only has 5 words of dialogue in the entire movie, and she does an outstanding job of bringing that character to life through her emotions. The story and direction are solid, as are the alien effects. They're pretty damn good. Not the best, but still pretty damn good. The last 15 minutes or so, however, I'm still mixed on. I was really confused by the end a little bit, and I was looking for more meaning in it. If you've seen it, then you'll know what I'm talking about. And I probably should give it another watch to try and figure out what the director was going for. I think I know, but I just want to see if I'm right. I think I am. Probably. I don't know. Maybe. We'll see. Our next film is from the era of Screams and I Know What You Did Last Summers. Urban Legend is a story about a group of pretty college students who are at a remote New England university. And the story focuses on Natalie, played by Alicia Witt, an academically gifted student who has a dark secret in her past. Now, Natalie and her friends are all enrolled in the folklore class, being taught by their professor, Robert England. He entertains his class with urban legends, which include the university's own urban legend about a psych professor who murdered 6 students 25 years ago. It was okay, I guess. It was the typical school teen stereotypes with your wide array of usual suspects who are plucked off one by one until one of them is revealed to be the killer, and for whatever reason. Scream, of course, did it better, and this one just falls to the bottom for me. Maybe if there was nothing else to compare it to that came before it, maybe I would have thought more of it. But I don't. I guess the cast did okay for a movie like this. I didn't hate any of the characters. I didn't hate the movie. It was just average for me. Cannibalistic Humanoid Underground Dwellers. Up next is 1984's c.h.u.d, directed by Douglas Cheek, starring Daniel Stern, the late great John Hurd, and Christopher Curry. It focuses on a New York police officer and a homeless shelter manager who investigate a series of disappearances only to discover that they are being killed by humanoid monsters that live in the sewer. I rented this from the video store back in the day and then maybe caught it on HBO or something like that years after. So I haven't seen it for at least maybe 15, 20 years or so, maybe a little more. And I remember why I thought this was great. I had fallen in love with practical horror effects back in the 80s, and stuff like this was really things that caught my eye. I understood what B-level horror was and how it differed from the bigger budgeted films. And I understood that the effects at the time were okay, even if they were somewhat cheesy at times. It was the thing. It did do well with its $1.5 million on the production size, but it wasn't enough to fare well in the theaters, not even doubling its money back. And it wasn't until home video that it finally gained its status as a cult film. I couldn't agree with more. This is a bona fide classic, and it was a treat revisiting it after all these years. I had fun watching this again. So if you haven't seen c.h.u.d, that's C period, H period, U period, D period. Check it out. You won't be disappointed. Next up is Terrifier 2. It takes place a year after the events of the first film, where Art is resurrected by an entity in the form of a pale little girl that dresses up like him. He then pursues teenager Sienna and her younger brother Jonathan. Now look out, Pennywise, there's a new clown in town. Or he's been here a little while, I just haven't witnessed the fabulous Art the Clown until now. This was another first time watch, and I still have yet to see the first Terrifier. I finally checked this out, and man, they were not fucking lying. I absolutely love this movie, and I love this fucking clown. There's just something about him and how actor David Howard Thornton plays him that just... great work here. The kills are new and unique, very different, definitely very gory. And that's what I like in a killer movie, and that's what I want in this type of film. However, the movie is a tad overlong, at just around 2.5 hours long. So it did drag in little spots, but it was quite entertaining. The ending did take me out of it for a minute with some weird choices that I did not expect at all, and I felt like I was missing something important. Other than those couple of things, I can't wait to get more of Art. And I will, because the third one is in the works, and I hope it's just as good, if not better, than 2. Many people may not know this, or it's just maybe a little overlooked, but John Landis not only gave us one of the greatest werewolf movies in An American Werewolf in London, but he also gave us a French vampire in Pittsburgh. Innocent Blood stars Anna Pollard as a French vampire who finds herself pitted against a gang of mobsters led by Robert Loggia, who she attacks but doesn't kill. This leads him to eventually becoming a vampire himself, and then he begins scheming to build a criminal empire of vampire gangsters. The first and only time I had seen this was back at the cinema in 1992, and I remember about half of it when I decided to rewatch it 30 years later. And I must say, it holds up pretty well by today's standards, and I really liked this one, and I loved it because it played more as a dark comedy than a straight throat-ripping vampire movie. The practical effects are okay in my book, and it all works, and it works well. But it's not without its flaws, and there are plenty, but there's enough here to enjoy and keep you entertained for the runtime. The film was a box office failure, raking in only $3 million at the box office, and I think it was due to the poor marketing it received. I even remember not knowing anything about it, and that the only reason I'd gone to see it was the poster alone. And that's a real bummer, because this has to be one underappreciated and overlooked horror film. And if you're a fan of vampire films, I recommend checking it out. Next up is From Beyond, which is a 1986 science fiction body horror film directed by Stuart Gordon. It's loosely based on a story by H.P. Lovecraft. The first film I ever caught of H.P. Lovecraft was Reanimator, and I really loved this film. So it was a year later when this movie came out, and it centers on a pair of scientists played by the awesome Jeffrey Combs. Also stars Ted Sorrell. And they attempt to stimulate the pineal gland with a device called the resonator, with the unforeseen result of them being able to see creatures from another dimension. The creatures drag the head scientist into the world, returning to him as a grotesque, shape-shifting monster that preys upon the others at the laboratory. And his design was pretty good, and it was the one thing that always stood out in my mind when I would always think of this film. This movie was nowhere near as good as Reanimator, but I still quite enjoyed it. It is a grotesque film with some great special effects, and I would highly recommend it, especially if you were a fan of Reanimator. Anyways, next up is the 1992 science fiction horror film Split Second, starring Rutger Hauer, which is one of my favorites in the genre. In this, it's the year 2008. Global warming has melted much of the polar ice caps, resulting in a serious flooding around the world, including the city of London, which is now under several feet of water. In the ensuing chaos, a new killer has emerged, one that's unnatural, unrelenting, and unstoppable. Maverick veteran policeman Harley Stone, played by Rutger Hauer, has a link with the killer who rips the hearts out of his victims. It murdered his partner, and he will stop at nothing to bring down the killer. As a new rookie, played by Alistair Duncan, is assigned to him, Stone must find the killer, rescue his girlfriend, played by the wonderful Kim Cattrall, while tending his own inner demons as he gets closer to his mysterious adversary, which is a vicious 10-foot alien creature. I kind of had a bad first impression of this movie when I first checked this out in the theater, and I remember really liking the dark, rainy tone and the mystery go on with Stone, but I just wanted to see more of that creature. I was getting this build-up to a kind of mediocre sci-fi horror film, but upon rewatching this video, I do appreciate it a little much more than I did then. And I really enjoyed it this time around, and I had real fun with the character of Harley Stone. And Rutger Hauer really nails this role. He was made for this role. It does feel like this was several genres in one, and to label it just a sci-fi or just a horror is a sin, because it's so much more than that. It's a buddy cop alien movie with a flooded London as a backdrop. I'm glad I didn't let the one bad viewing in my younger naive years keep me from being able to accept it for what it was. And I had more fun with it that way. Rabid is a 1977 body horror film written and directed by David Cronenberg. It stars Marilyn Chambers as a woman who is horrifically injured in a motorcycle accident, and after undergoing an experimental surgery, develops an orifice under one of her armpits that hides a phallic clitoral stinger that she feeds upon people's blood with. You know, it's kind of like a vagina with a penis stinger. But anyways, though, she bites, becomes infected, and they become zombie-ish, and they spread the disease exponentially, and the result becomes chaos. Man, I love Cronenberg, and I should know what I'm getting into when I watch a Cronenberg film, and this is David Cronenberg through and through. A lot of early signature stuff here to be seen, and I tell you that this was one sick, weird ride. I felt a little comfortable at times, and at times it was a little too much. Apparently, star Marilyn Chambers was an ex-porn star before doing this, and her acting is just as good as anyone else in this low-budget indie. She's not terrible, but she isn't great either. The violence is plenty. The effects are decent. It has hills and valleys in the pacing, but all in all, it's an okay film, but it's probably one I will not be in no rush to watch again. The next one on the list is the first one I decided to watch when I decided to do this video, and it's probably the worst I've seen, and that's 1983's The Being, starring Martin Landau. Made on a supposed budget of $4.5 million by first-time director Jackie Kong, who was given the budget by her then-husband Bill Osco, who wanted a departure from his previously sexually explicit films such as the 1974 sexploitation film Flesh Gordon. This movie was absolutely abysmal. It was a cheesy, goofy film. The acting was horrendous, and I think Martin Landau signing on to this fucking horror atrocity was mind-boggling. It was just a silly horror film about toxic waste being dumped in a small town. A boy goes missing, transforms into this being, and more people go missing. It was hard to get through without thinking I was wasting my time, and I was. And I'm definitely glad that I missed it back in the day, and not thrilled I wasted my time with it this time. And apparently it gained some mild cult status, but I'm not really sure why, because it really isn't that good of a movie. I caught this next film back in the early days of pay-per-view, and that is Dr. Giggles. And Dr. Giggles stars Larry Drake, who was the villain in the first two Darkman films. He also starred in the hit crime legal drama L.A. Law. Here, Drake is coming in hot after the first Darkman film, hamming it up as a psychotic son of his mass-murdering Dr. Dad, who escapes from his mental institution in a great opening scene. He exacts revenge on the townspeople where his father was caught, and he seeks to give one of them a heart transplant. I really remember liking this one, and I've been wanting to revisit it if I have the chance over the years, just never got a chance to. The story is simple, but very flawed, overlooking those flaws and gaps in the story, and there are plenty. I certainly found it very entertaining, and that's because it all rests on Larry Drake's Dr. Giggles, and he does a fantastic job with it. The script is tongue-in-cheek, with a lot of wisecracks and puns. Aside from Drake, the acting is serviceable for this type of film. The kills are done with surgical precision, and there are definitely some good ones to be seen, but nothing to write home about. It's definitely worth checking out if you haven't. Yeah, it's kind of campy, has its flaws, but it really was a fun watch for me. A good time for past an hour and a half. Definitely give this horror comedy a watch. Next up on the list is the best on the list this season, and that's Near Dark, a 1987 neo-Western horror film directed by Point Break and the Hurt Locker's Catherine Bigelow. It stars Aliens alumni Bill Paxton, Lance Henriksen, and Jeanette Goldstein. The plot, not seen Near Dark, I highly recommend that you do, because if you don't, it's going to be a sin. I'm telling you, you will not be disappointed, and you will thank me later. Check out Near Dark. Next, I watched Chopping Mall. It's a 1986 techno-horror film that was originally called Killbots, but after a poor test screening, it was re-edited and renamed. It is directed by Jim Wynorski and stars Kelly Maroney from Night of the Comet. Chopping Mall is a story about three high-tech Model 101 protector robots equipped with state-of-the-art security devices and that have been recruited as the new mechanical night watchmen for the Park Plaza Mall. When a jolting bolt of lightning short-circuits the main computer control, the robots turn into killbots and go on the loose after four couples that are hiding out in the mall trying to make it out after hours. The only time I caught this was on late-night cable, and I really only remember the premise and some flashes of scenes here and there. When I first started rewatching this, I totally got Short-Circuit Johnny 5 if he broke bad vibes. And this was an okay time killer. I wanted to like it more, but I really didn't. It's cinematic cheese and fine wine that hasn't aged well at all. The acting is so-so, and the effects are pretty crappy and sometimes even laughable. And the robot designs have a lot to be desired even at B-movie level standards. There were, however, enough of a following in the home video market to eventually take it to cult level status. I just wasn't one of them. Next up, I watched Pet Cemetery Bloodlines. It's 1969, and a young Judd Crandall has dreams of leaving his hometown of Ludlow, Maine behind, but he soon discovers sinister secrets buried within, and he is forced to confront a dark family history that will forever keep him connected to Ludlow. Banded together, Judd and his childhood friends must fight an ancient evil that has gripped Ludlow since its founding, and once on Earth has the power to destroy everything in its past. Bloodlines is based on the untold chapter in Stephen King's Pet Sematary novel, and it's a prequel to the 2019 Pet Sematary remake, which I thought was just okay. And to me, this was not really needed. Yeah, it gives us some history on the town of Ludlow and the cemetery itself, but we could have lived without it. I did like Judd's character, which was well played by Jackson White. I didn't think it was a terrible movie. It's just a story which is the weakest point, and the cast is great. It's got Henry Thomas, David Duchovny, who are excellently portraying their characters in this film of damaged fathers who are broken and on two different sides. The sound is excellent, It's shot really well, and the directing by first-time director Lindsay Beer is on par with the previous film. The tone and mood and atmosphere are all great. I just felt that the story is what held it back from being a much better film. For those of you that haven't heard of it, and I'm pretty sure you horror fans have, Maniac Cop is a slasher film from 1988 starring Tom Atkins and Bruce Campbell. It's about a murderous ex-police officer played by Robert Zadar. Excuse me, I have a hard time saying that. But anyways, he returns from the dead to seek revenge on the people who wronged him. You know, this movie certainly has not aged well. It's a little slow and boring at times, but the overall atmosphere and acting saves a somewhat okay horror film. The kills and gores are decent, but it's those kills that we wait for in a film about a dead homicidal maniac cop on a power trip. It just drags it along getting there at times. And the best part of the movie was Bruce Campbell in a more serious role than he is known for. It was fun watching him in this, and I must say, how many alibi does that guy need? It's an okay film for a one-time watch, and if you don't wind up liking this one, or even if you do and want to join its cult status, there are 2 other films in this series. Not much more I can really say about this. You'll either love it or hate it. I'm kind of mixed on it. I don't know. I fought really hard whether I was going to watch this next one or not. I mean, I knew exactly what it was and how bad it was going to be. But in the end, I decided the only reason I was going to endure this guaranteed shit show of a horror movie was for you in this list. Well, that and my morbid curiosity did get the best of me a little bit, I guess. But there was no way in hell I was going to watch this movie sober. So I didn't. Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey starts with this amazing sequence of sketch drawings of Pooh and sets up the backstory of how Christopher Robin, now a young man, leaves the 100-acre woods to go to college, leaving Pooh, Piglet, and the rest with no one to help them, and they have to fend for themselves. As time passes, and I'm sure getting very angry and hungry, the 2, Pooh and Pig, become feral and decide to eat Eeyore. After getting a taste for that blood, though, Winnie the Pooh and Piglet set off to find a new source of food, and it's not long before their bloody rampage begins. I won't say that this film ruined my childhood. I didn't hate it because my expectations were pretty low, but I didn't like it either, because this movie is really, really bad. But it isn't the worst movie I've seen either. The makeup designs for Pooh and Piglet look so fake that I was worried that the twist of the movie is going to have them being humans the whole time, dressed up in costumes. That's what it looked like. Someone dressed up in a bear and pig mask. Nope. We're supposed to believe that these are 2 anthropomorphic creatures, and it didn't work. The cast is barely okay, and the script, which is a story about some kill fodder renting a cabin in the 100-acre woods and their attempt to survive. The dialogue is awful, some of the kills are okay, and there are some nice shots, but there was a much better story to be had here, with turning Pooh and Pig into slasher characters. A better story would have been some type of home invasion movie about Christopher Robin taking his family to his old childhood home in the woods. After going to college and having a daughter, it could have had him trying to protect them from the vengeful Pooh and Piglet. Something like that, anyways. I just felt that the filmmakers rushed to get a horror movie based on the childhood characters from Winnie the Pooh book. It did hit public domain in January 22, and it was quickly greenlit. You know, it was made for $100,000, and it was just going to be released as a one-night event or something. But the bad buzz got it going so well that it was announced that it was going to open nationwide. I shit you not, this movie made over $5 million at the box office on that $100,000 budget. It's so bad it's a bad movie that got a little love, and its sequel greenlit with the bigger budget. So yeah, there you go. When an archaeological expedition opens an ancient evil tomb, the unimaginable evil of the cursed pharaoh Talos is unleashed. But before all are lost, team leader Sir Richard Turkle, played by horror legend Christopher Lee, heroically sacrifices his own life to destroy the tomb and contain Talos. This is Tales of the Mummy. Russell Macaulay's Tales from the Mummy. It stars action star Jason Scott Lee, who looked absolutely bored in his role. The movie has a great beginning with Christopher Lee, but it never really delivers. At times, the story seems to be getting a little muddled and often isn't clear about the characters in the story, and I'm still not sure how it arrived at its conclusion. It falls into that category of delightfully campy, and the fact that the actors are being so serious when these flying bandages, sometimes crawling bandages, are making their rounds around the city of London. It just adds to the hilarity of the movie. I think there were some good elements here. As I've said in the other reviews, good underlying elements, but it's just poorly executed. I expected more from it. I didn't hate it. I just thought it could have been so much more, a much better Mummy film than it was. But especially with the success of the Brendan Fraser films, which are far better than this, of course. But they had some interesting ideas. They just didn't play out too well, guys. It was a good way to kill a couple hours. It was shot well. That's all I really got to say on that one. Next up, I watched Graduation Day. After a high school track runner suddenly dies from a heart attack after finishing a race, a killer wearing a sweatsuit and fencing mask begins killing off her friends one by one, just days before their graduation. This movie was made about a year after the first Friday the 13th in order to capitalize on the success of that film, while also trying to capitalize on the horror slasher genre in general. To me, this was not a very good slasher film. In fact, I found it pretty boring. Everything about this is just average to me. There's lots of hills and valleys in this for a slasher film. The kills ain't nothing to write home about. The cast was okay, sometimes laughable, with cameos by Lena Quigley and Vanna White. But, I probably won't watch this one again, and I honestly felt like Winnie the Pooh, Blood and Honey was a more entertaining film than this, and I'd rather watch that than this again. A lot of people seem to like this film, but I just didn't. Next up's for the cat lovers out there, and that's Uninvited. Now, Uninvited is about a cat who is infected with a genetically engineered virus, who then escapes the lab and goes on a killing spree once it makes its way on a yacht owned by a shady businessman and his young guest. Let me tell you, I laughed my way through all 9 lives with this one. There really aren't too many killer cat movies out there, and the ones that they do have pretty much all suck. It's a stretch, but this one is the best of the few they have, I guess. I haven't seen many, but there you go. This is cheesy trash, and even then it's very slow to get started, guys. We are bombarded with long, dull scenes of character development while we wait for this feline to wreak its havoc nearly an hour into this film. Some of the characters were more annoying than others, and the actors were low rent, in my opinion. The cat, well, let me tell you about the cat. Imagine a totally normal-looking cat, and then imagine a smaller, meaner, uglier, evil cat emerging from its mouth, and then its victim explodes in blood off-screen. The cat puppet, well, yeah, it was awful and heavy on the cheese. So, guys, if you are cat lovers, check this one out. You may like it, you may not. Next up, I watched Prophecy. Now, this is a 1979 eco-horror film directed by John Frankenheimer about a company who is polluting the environment, the monsters arising from that damage, and the people that are sent in to investigate what's going on. Now, this was a first-time watch for me, and back in the day, it was regarded as one of the best in the string of films released in the 70s and early 80s in which monsters spawned from this environmental pollution and human tampering with nature. The film follows an EPA agent played by Robert Foxworth and his wife played by Talia Shire, and they are dispatched to assess the damage of a logging company that is causing damage to a patch of forest claimed by Native Americans. They discover that a chemical waste used in processing had leaked into the local river and has caused a local bear to mutate and start wreaking havoc in the wilderness. This was just good old school horror at its best. The cast was on point, the script was pretty good, and there really is only one complaint. And that's because they didn't follow through on a metaphor about this supposed to be an evil corporation who has been harming the environment and these Native Americans, but we're focusing on this mutated bear who is started running amok in the wilderness. The bear design, which is pretty much a suit, is a decent, if not a little bit silly, but the lighting helps make it work quite a bit. And for a PG-rated horror film, the kills are quite surprisingly good. Pretty gory. And there's an early scene that reminded me of Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, where there's these campers camping, and one of the deaths reminded me of that sleeping bag scene in Friday the 13th Part 6, where Jason smashes the girl against a tree. But anyways, Frankenheimer did a great job with this film, and according to him, during post-production, the studio demanded that the film be cut from an R rating down to a PG, and he felt that this really damaged the film, destroying the scariness that it had created. And in all honesty, I say bring on an R-rated version of this film. Don't be deterred by the PG rating, because it is quite, it's quite gory, and it's surprisingly, I think it should have been rated R, but anyways. So if you like Ickle horror films, check this one out, guys. It's a gem, and I'm glad I watched it. And put it on your watch list. Next up on the long list of 31 films I've watched this horror season is Sloth House, a 2023 comedy horror directed by Matthew Goodhue. Now, this is about a teen who adopts a three-toed sloth named Alpha, takes it back to her sorority in hopes of making it their sorority mascot, and also gain enough votes to become president of the sorority. The sorority sisters fall in love with this sloth and have a good time with it until they start getting whacked off one by one, and the sloth then becomes implicated in these murders. Man, let me tell you, I went into this film totally blind. I had read the synopsis, but I had not seen one trailer for it. Man, a killer sloth, the world's slowest animal, killing it up. I was game, but how the hell were they going to do it? Well, I should have known by it being a comedy horror how they might, but boy, did I not expect it to turn out this way. This was one wild fucking movie. I mean, wow. You really need to be high watching this one. It is one of the dumbest, if not the dumbest, idea for a horror movie. But I couldn't stop watching. I just wanted to see what the fuck ever they were going to have this sloth do besides killing sorority girls while taking selfies or driving a car, finding a location on GPS. Man, this falls into it. It's so bad it's good. Although the characters are all one-dimensional and irritating dialogue is there, one of the stupidest scripts, I did have a good time with it. But it's honestly something I probably won't watch again. So check it out if you want to see a killer sloth hacking up sorority sisters. It was a good time. Anyways, moving on. Next, I checked out The Dark Half. Now, this is based on Stephen King's novel of the same name, written back in 1989, which was 5 years after he had revealed that his pseudonym was Richard Bachman, where he's writing more pulpy fiction. And it played a big deal in the film's release. It was held on to for 2 years. Overall, it's a suspenseful film. It's entertaining and worth checking out. So give it a shot. Next up, guys, is The Brain. And this comes to us from 1988. And although it's not a very good film, it's still quite entertaining and wonderfully wacky. The story involves a television host, Dr. Blakely, who's played by legendary actor David Gale from Reanimator. He hosts this sort of self-help show to assist people with independent thinking. Now, it is discovered that he's using a creature called the Brain to brainwash and use mind control on his viewers. The script is interesting, but the film is hindered at every turn by its tiny budget and certain directorial choices, along with cheesy as hell and undeniably goofy creature effects. I almost turned it off several times, but I didn't. And the acting is to be expected, especially on this level of a trashy B movie. This was more of I would say, a D, but nothing in this film can make me watch it again. Okay? That's it. All right. Another George Romero directed film I watched was Monkey Shines, and this is about a young athlete named Alan who is paralyzed after he is struck by a truck while jogging. He begins losing all hope for living until he meets Ella, a sweet little capuchin monkey who is trained to fetch and carry for him around the house. He develops a bond with Ella. Ella then becomes homicidal after she has been injected with an experimental serum of brain tissue, which is supposed to make her smarter. Pretty soon, Ella's up to no good, and the paraplegic Alan starts developing a bond. I would say a telepathically linked bond with Ella, and she begins to respond to his underlying rage and frustration over his current situation with his life, his girlfriend who dumped him for his doctor, pretty much. I rented this when it first came out in the 80s, and I think I caught it maybe once more on HBO or something like that. I really remember liking it then, and now that I've rewatched it, this has got to be a solid gem for me. And I've been begging my wife for a capuchin monkey ever since. The script is solid, and Pooh, who plays Ella, is great. I had fun watching her easily outperform her co-stars. Jason B., I hope I didn't butcher that, gives a solid performance as Alan, and I believed the bond between him and Ella. The supporting cast are all serviceable, and the direction by Romero is pretty decent. And I did like this a little better than The Dark Half, I must say. Check it out, guys. Especially if you like monkeys. It's a good time. Dolls was another first-time watch for me, guys, and this is a movie directed by Stuart Gordon, who directed Reanimator and From Beyond. Now, Stuart Gordon creates a thriving triumph with such a simple premise about a group of people who get stuck in the mud in a storm and have to seek shelter in an old mansion run by a doll maker and his wife. Now, the dolls, it seems to have a life of their own, made possible by a doll maker's secret process. The dolls will kill anyone who intends to harm the old man, his wife, or the house. It's not overly violent, gory, but it's got a lot of fun atmosphere. Creepy old people, an old Gothic house. The stop motion on the dolls and creature effects are quite satisfying for its time. And you can call it cheesy, but it worked for this film. Most of the early action occurs off-screen, but it remains feisty as victims are dragged and thrown around like rag dolls. Then it gets a bit bloody. I thought this is a pretty entertaining film, one that plays out like an old fairy tale where, don't lose touch with your childhood. This might not be as gory as Reanimator, but it sure is a great movie. This moody fairy tale of a horror film should be seen by all horror fans. Chucky fans, I know you'll like it. Especially if you like the killers in small sizes. This movie was so fun, creative, and scary. Check it out, guys. Next on the list, worst on the list, last on the list, is 1987's Creeazoids. Set in 1998, it's 6 years after an apocalyptic nuclear war, Creeazoids follows 5 U.S. Army deserters who take refuge from acid rain in a seemingly abandoned laboratory facility. They soon discover that the laboratory is a top-secret government research center where a genetically engineered creature still lurks. Trash, 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 trash. This plot was like so many other hybrid alien dumpster fire movies. The acting was fucking atrocious and irritating. It was dark. The kills were dark. The fucking alien was too dark. Bad, bad, bad. Everything about this was bad. I don't have anything good to say about this film, really. I tried watching it twice. It took me 3 times to watch it, actually. I had to turn it off twice, like 30 minutes each time. But anyways, it was a hell of a chore to get through, and I did it for you, and there we are. Well, guys, that's it for the 31 films I've watched this Halloween season. I'll do another one next year. God forbid I'm still here.
But anyways, I hope you guys like this video. What film stood out to you? What do you plan on checking out? What did you find helpful? Anyways, if you like today's content, please be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you're a returning viewer, thank you for coming back. Sorry it's been a while. Like the video if you did. Hit that notification bell on the way out. Guys, this is Scott from the Movie Den. I'm glad to be back. We'll see you next time. What say you?